Hello, I'm Fox, and I am not a game designer. Today we are going over essentially kind of a system proposal or system overview, just like a very expanded, broad term perspective of what we are trying to accomplish. We are not looking to reinvent the wheel, but we're still in the ideas stage of everything. We're trying to just make sure that we have a very clear view of what we are trying to make in order that it makes populating those sections a lot easier. Um, when I say we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, I'm going to write out a chart and a second, and it's gonna look, I don't know, kind of interesting, but I'm gonna show where I got it from. So all card games, and that is number one, is we want to make a card game. For the record, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be a trading card game, but we're trying to put cards on a board. That's the goal. The key part about trading card games is collectability. It'd be fun to make collectible things, but it isn't actually as necessary. It's just the fact that we're making cards with, I don't know, unique art, unique effects, things like that. The way most, or I'm going to say all card games work, is you have a deck of cards. Well, not all card games. You can invent find playing card games that probably don't meet all this criteria. But specifically, I'm talking about the two I've played, which is Yu-Gi-Oh and um, Pokemon and Digimon and Magic the Gathering. You all have a deck. You all draw from the deck, so you have cards in your hand, right? You all then play those cards, and those cards do things, and then those cards go to the graveyard, right? This is a very simple system. This is how the game works, right? I'm going to call this input, right? I'm going to call this deploying. I'm going to call this just like stuff, right? It's like units and interaction. And we're not going to write out a part for this, but understand that this is the cycle that we're going to do. It's not even a difference. We're literally going to be doing all this. Our game is going to look a little different because in the past, I've done a lot of recycling the graveyard into the deck, and there are lots of reasons for that, but we can get into that later. We are also playing on a board, so we not only need deployment rules, we also need positioning rules. But that's not really important right now. Here is essentially how I'm imagining the game functioning, right? Especially since in previous versions we had economy things that were going on, right? We have two sides of this. We have input and output, right? In the input side, we have things, it divides into two, more or less. I mean, this isn't exact, but input, we have cards. We're really talking about card draw, but like card plussing, right? And then we have deployment, which really, I don't know what to call this. This is just like the rules that you have set up to put cards in the field. You could argue that this should just be in the middle as its own thing. The reason it's here is because sometimes it requires cards in order to deploy units. And if we look at number 3, this is essentially the strategy side, and this is essentially the tactics side. That's not really important, but that's kind of what's going on here, right? The way the system's going to work, right, is you draw cards. You need to have cards in your hand. You then need to be able to put those units on the board. And then the things that you're putting on the board are units, right? The things you move around, the monsters, the creatures, whatever. And I kept renaming this. I don't know what the best name is. I called it boost cards for a while. I called it interaction because that's what it would be. Interaction for a while because that's what it would be in other games. I don't know what to call it, but the point is that this is not these are cards that do not affect your ability to do more things like it would be on the input side of things. This is the stuff that either affects your opponent or just in general is a drain on the cards that you have in your hand. I think I will call it interaction though, just for the sake of argument. Now from here, right, you can kind of see how the game would work, right? You draw cards, you then put units on or the things on the field that let you play more cards, right? But we have lots of questions about how all of this goes, right? How many cards? I mean, goodness, it's gonna be hard to write all this out, but it's like how many cards to draw? Um, where do they come from, right? At one point, I had a thing that said short and long. So like a short-term draw would be like an instant effect or a spell effect in Yu-Gi-Oh, whereas like you play it once, you get a couple cards, and then you're done. Long-term effect would be like every single turn you're drawing a new card, right? But I don't even know if like, and that's probably a pretty realistic way to split it up. But I don't even know if that's necessarily the question, because one of the first questions is not so much where the cards come from, because you're going to have a deck of cards, right, that you're going to draw from, but what are like the base rules for it, and what are the base what are things you can get from card effect, and that's going to be the same thing for deploying. This is the exact same thing, right? Deploying especially, when you play Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, Yu-Gi-Oh has very broad rules for deploying. It might, when you read the rules, it might feel like they have a lot of rules, but they have one unlimited thing called special summoning that has that essentially has no rules. You can do as many times you want as long as you have a card effect to do it, which essentially means that deploying in Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, is determined almost exclusively by card effects. Magic the Gathering, it's not quite like that because you need lands in order to cast spells. So, oh wait, no, that's the same thing. Well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. So this will probably be mostly governed by card effects, I would expect, probably. That's kind of what it was before. In past versions, it was like you played a building. Let's say it was a house, and then you could put a unit from that building, and then that unit goes out and fights, right? That's probably something to consider. But once again, it's that. But there are questions about like is that how we want it to work? We could also make it maybe more of a goodness, we're getting into proposals at this point. At this point, we're just trying to broadly talk about what what we need to be thinking about when it comes to where all this stuff is coming from, right? Units probably aren't coming from rules necessarily, or the way you would split these up is a little bit different than the way you would split up this stuff, right? There's a lot of baseline rules, but units are going to be exclusively cards, and interaction is going to be exclusively cards, right? You're not going to have like a special action to kill one of your opponent's units, for example. That would be the type of thing that would be a rules effect that has nothing to do with the card, right? So everything's going to be cards here, right? But from here, we still can split them up, right? And from here, we can split up all this stuff. But like I said, the deeper we go, the more we get into questions and proposals for how we are going to implement this. I think I'm going to stop this here just because I just wanted to get this over with. That way, if I talk about things in the future, we'll all be on the same page of how I'm viewing things. There could be legitimate criticism of this thing in and of itself. If anybody thinks that I'm either missing a step or I need to add a step, or if anybody anybody has any ideas for any parts of this. Some of this stuff I have thought about already because there are a whole bunch of things that go into what each one of these things need to be. And this is version 3 after all, I do know a thing or two about what I'm trying to achieve. But, yeah.